I never thought an iron gate would become my perfect weapon of destruction, but when the powerful HOA Queen Victoria Harrington knelt down, begging me to open the gate that morning, I knew every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, and every cent I spent was worth it. You know, sometimes justice comes from the simplest things, like a cheap lock and a little patience. I only wish I'd recorded that moment on video. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because this story is guaranteed to make you laugh out loud. I used to be a structural engineer in Houston. Good job, decent pay, but the concrete jungle started suffocating me after 15 years. My father had been a country lawyer who'd raised me on stories of rural life before we moved to the city when I was 10. Those memories of open spaces never quite left me. So when I turned 42 and inherited some money from my uncle, I decided it was time for a change. I wanted land, animals, and the kind of peace you can't find between high-rises. I spent months searching until I found the perfect spot. 15 acres of beautiful Texas countryside just outside Austin, with a small creek running through it, enough flat land for a modest ranch house, and rolling hills that caught the sunset just right. The property bordered a fancy subdivision called Oakwood Estates, but was separated enough that I wouldn't have neighbors breathing down my neck. What sealed the deal was the price, just within my budget, with enough left over to start building my dream ranch. The real estate agent, Lisa, seemed a bit hesitant when showing me the property, which I found odd, but she assured me there were no legal issues. "Just one thing you should know," she said. "This property isn't part of the Oakwood Estates HOA, even though it borders it. Sometimes they try to claim jurisdiction, but your deed clearly states you're independent." I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too excited about my 15 acres of freedom. I signed the papers in March and started planning immediately. By April, I had a basic blueprint for the ranch house and had ordered materials for the fencing. My plan was simple. Start with a modest operation, some chickens, a vegetable garden, maybe a couple of horses down the line, and gradually build it up. I wasn't looking to make a fortune. I just wanted a sustainable life away from the rat race. The property had an old dirt road that ran through one corner, connecting Oakwood Estates to the main highway, but according to my deed, it was on my land. The previous owner had allowed residents to use it as a shortcut, and I didn't see any harm in continuing the arrangement. Little did I know this insignificant dirt path would become the centerpiece of the strangest battle of my life, one that would test my patience, my principles, and eventually lead to sweet, sweet victory. My first week on the property was pure bliss. I camped out in a trailer while waiting for construction to begin on the house. The mornings were crisp, the bird song was my alarm clock, and I spent my days marking boundaries and clearing areas for my future garden beds. It wasn't until my 5th day there that I had my first encounter with the Oakwood Estates HOA in the form of Victoria Harrington and her right-hand man, Robert Winters. They drove up in Victoria's gleaming white Mercedes SUV, parking right at the edge of my property. Victoria was tall and immaculately dressed in what looked like designer casual wear, if there is such a thing, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and the kind of tan that comes from expensive vacations rather than honest work. Robert, a tall, stern-looking man with military posture and a crew cut, followed 2 steps behind her like a loyal sergeant. "Good morning," Victoria called out with practiced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new owner. We're from the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. I'm Victoria Harrington, the president, and this is Robert Winters, our vice president. We thought we'd come by and welcome you to the neighborhood." I wiped my hands on my jeans and extended one to shake. "Ethan Reynolds. Nice to meet you both." Victoria barely touched my hand before letting go and glancing around my property with thinly veiled disapproval. "We just wanted to drop by and give you a copy of our HOA guidelines," she said, handing me a thick binder. "All properties in this area need to maintain certain standards to preserve our community values and property prices." I thumbed through the binder, filled with rules about everything from lawn height to mailbox colors, before looking back at her. "I appreciate the welcome, but my property isn't part of your HOA." My real estate agent and the deed were quite clear on that. Victoria's smile tightened. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding. All properties in this area are under our jurisdiction. It's been that way for years." I kept my tone friendly but firm. "I'm afraid the legal documents say otherwise. I specifically bought this property because it's independent, but I'm planning to keep it nice. No junk cars or eyesores, I promise." Robert cleared his throat. "Perhaps you misunderstood your paperwork. The HOA boundary extends to include this parcel." I stood my ground. "I'm a former engineer. Reading technical documents is what I do. My land is not part of your HOA, according to every legal document I sign." Victoria's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Well, we should sort this out quickly. Having a farm operation so close to our community could significantly impact property values. I'm sure you understand our concern. The way she said farm operation made it sound like I was planning to open a toxic waste dump. It's a small ranch, not a factory farm, I replied. And again, since I'm not part of your HOA, your property value concerns, while understandable, aren't really my legal obligation. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile remained fixed. Well, we'll have our attorney review the situation. In the meantime, welcome to the area. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. As they turned to leave, Victoria paused. Oh, and you should know that the road running through your property, that's considered a community access point. We'll need that kept clear and maintained at all times. With that parting shot, they climbed back into her luxury SUV and drove away, leaving me standing there with the unwanted HOA binder and a growing sense of unease. Later that afternoon, while I was setting up solar-powered security cameras, a habit from city living, a compact Honda pulled up to my property. A petite woman with short brown hair stepped out, carrying what looked like a homemade pie. "Hi there, I'm Olivia Reed, your neighbor from the edge of Oakwood. Thought I'd bring you a proper welcome." Unlike Victoria's manufactured warmth, Olivia's smile seemed genuine. I invited her to join me for coffee at my makeshift campsite, and she accepted readily. "I see you've already met the Harrington welcome wagon," she said, nodding toward the HOA binder I'd tossed aside. "Word travels fast," I replied, pouring her coffee into a camping mug. "They seem intense." Olivia's laugh was quick and genuine. "That's one way to put it. Victoria runs that HOA like her personal kingdom. Her husband's a plastic surgeon and they've got more money than sense. Robert just follows her lead. He's ex-military and loves rules and order." She took a sip of coffee. "Just so you know, Victoria's also the top real estate agent in the area. She's been trying to buy up properties around the subdivision for years. Rumor has it she wants to expand Oakwood Estates and double her commission checks." The warning bells that had been faintly ringing in my head started clanging louder. She mentioned something about my property affecting their values. "Think that's what this is about?" Olivia nodded. "Almost certainly. She tried the same tactics with me last year when I planted a wildflower meadow instead of the regulation Kentucky bluegrass. Called it unsightly vegetation. I only escaped her wrath because technically my lot is on the very edge of HOA territory, and I had a good lawyer who found a loophole in the bylaws about native plant conservation." She took another sip of coffee. "I'd be careful if I were you. Victoria doesn't give up easily." I thanked her for the warning but assured her I wasn't worried. My property wasn't part of their HOA, and I had the legal documents to prove it. What could they really do? Olivia's expression turned serious. "That's exactly what the Ramirez family said before Victoria drove them out last year. Their property wasn't technically part of the HOA either, but she found ways to make their lives miserable, calling code enforcement daily, filing noise complaints, even getting the county to reassess their property tax. They eventually sold for 30% below market value to a holding company that Victoria's husband happens to be a silent partner in." As Olivia drove away after our coffee, her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I'd faced my share of professional conflicts as an engineer, but this felt different. More personal, more invasive. Still, I wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA president bully me off my dream property. If Victoria Harrington wanted a fight, she'd picked the wrong opponent. The next few weeks were peaceful. I started work on my chicken coop, planted my first vegetable beds, and contracted builders to begin construction on my modest ranch house. I was starting to think maybe Olivia had exaggerated Victoria's vendetta, until the first letter arrived. It was printed on official-looking Oakwood Estates HOA letterhead, formally notifying me that my agricultural activities were in violation of community standards and demanding I cease all farm operations within 7 days or face escalating fines. I immediately called my old college buddy Daniel Kelly, now a successful real estate attorney in Austin. He agreed to review my property documents right away. 2 days later, Daniel confirmed what I already knew. My property had never been part of the Oakwood Estates HOA, and their letter held absolutely no legal weight. "This is just intimidation tactics," Daniel said over the phone. "Ignore it for now, but document everything. If they escalate, we'll respond officially." I followed his advice and continued with my building projects, but I also increased security measures around the property, installing more cameras and motion-activated lights. Just as Daniel predicted, a second letter arrived a week later, this one threatening legal action if I didn't comply with HOA regulations. The same day, I spotted Victoria and Robert at the edge of my property with measuring tapes and clipboards. I approached them casually, phone recording in my pocket. "Afternoon, folks. Can I help you with something?" Victoria startled slightly but quickly recovered. "We're just verifying property line compliance for community right-of-ways access," she said smoothly. "This road here needs to meet county standards for emergency vehicle access." I kept my tone neutral. "Interesting, since this road is entirely on my property according to the survey markers. You're actually trespassing right now." Robert looked uncomfortable, but Victoria's smile didn't waver. "There seems to be some confusion about boundaries. The community has had access to this road for decades. It's an established easement." I nodded slowly. "If there's an official easement, I'd love to see the documentation. My title search didn't show any such restrictions." That finally cracked her composure. "Our attorneys will be in touch," she snapped, before marching back to her car with Robert trailing behind. I spent the rest of the day fortifying my position, both literally and figuratively. I marked my property boundaries more visibly with stakes and bright orange surveyor's tape. I also made copies of all my property documents and easement records, stored both physical and digital versions in secure locations, and set up additional security cameras specifically focused on the areas where Victoria had been measuring. Something about her confidence bothered me. Was there something in my paperwork I was missing? That evening, I pored over every document again, line by line. Everything seemed in order, until I noticed a small notation on one of the plat maps referencing a utility easement near the back corner of my property. It wasn't the road easement Victoria had mentioned, but something else entirely. I made a note to ask Daniel about it in the morning. While waiting for his office to open, I decided to investigate myself. Following the coordinates on the plat map, I hiked to the far corner of my property, where I found a small, unobtrusive pump house partially hidden by overgrown bushes. It looked like standard water utility infrastructure, with Oakwood Water District markings on the locked door. This had to be what the easement referred to, but why would Victoria care about a water pump station? And more importantly, what did it have to do with my road? Later that morning, I called Daniel with my discovery. "Interesting," he said after I described the pump station. "Let me make some calls to the water district and check the county's infrastructure maps." He called back that afternoon with illuminating news. That pump station is actually the main water distribution point for the entire Oakwood Estates development, he explained. And here's the kicker. According to county records, the only legal access route for maintenance vehicles is through that dirt road on your property. There's a recorded utility easement that gives the water district the right to use that specific road to access the pump station. Suddenly, Victoria's interest in my road made more sense, but it also revealed a critical flaw in her strategy. "So they're claiming the road is under HOA jurisdiction, when actually it's my private road with a limited utility easement?" Daniel confirmed my understanding. "Exactly. They can't have it both ways. Either it's your private road with an easement, which means you control it subject to the utility's access rights, or it's not your road at all, which would contradict your deed and property records. Victoria is either misinformed or deliberately lying." Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a formal response to the HOA's threatening letters with Daniel's help. The letter firmly established my property rights, acknowledged the limited utility easement for the water district only, and demanded that the HOA cease and desist all harassment and false claims regarding my property. We sent it by certified mail to ensure delivery and record. Meanwhile, I continued developing my little ranch. The chicken coop was finished, housing a dozen happy hens. My vegetable garden was thriving with spring plantings of tomatoes, peppers, and squash. The foundation for my modest ranch house was laid and framing had begun. I was living my dream, one nail and seed at a time. For a brief period, it seemed like my formal letter might have worked. A week passed with no further communications from Victoria or the HOA, then 2 weeks. I started to relax, focusing on my building projects and daily farm chores. Olivia stopped by occasionally, bringing her 2 children to see the chickens and sample fresh vegetables. We were becoming friends, and she provided valuable insights into the community dynamics I was peripherally part of. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 23 days. I woke one Monday morning to the sound of heavy machinery near my property line. Grabbing binoculars, I was stunned to see a construction crew setting up along the entire border between my land and Oakwood Estates. They were drilling holes for what looked like fence posts, substantial ones. I threw on clothes and rushed over. The foreman, a weathered man in his 50s, explained they were contracted by Oakwood Estates HOA to build a security fence along the property line. He showed me permits that appeared to be in order for fence construction on Oakwood Estates land. Technically, they weren't on my property, but the placement of the fence would completely cut off direct access between my land and the main road. The only way in or out would be a much longer route through rough backcountry roads that became nearly impassable during heavy rain. It was a calculated move, something that appeared legal on paper, but would cause me significant practical problems. And more concerning, the fence would block the very road that the water district needed to access their pump station. I called Daniel immediately, and he arrived that afternoon. We watched from my property as the construction continued at a rapid pace. Concrete footings were already being poured. "They're being clever," Daniel said grimly. "The fence is technically on their land, so they don't need your permission, but it's a blatant attempt to force you out by making your property less accessible and less valuable." I pointed to where the fence line crossed the dirt road. "What about the utility easement for the pump station? Won't this fence block that too?" Daniel nodded. "That's where they've made a critical error. They can build a fence on their property line, but they can't legally obstruct a recorded utility easement, especially one that serves their own community's water supply. I think Victoria is so focused on pressuring you that she's overlooked the implications for essential services." A slow smile spread across my face as the potential dawned on me. "So they're building a fence that cuts off their own water infrastructure access?" Daniel returned my smile. "Exactly, and that gives us leverage." Daniel suggested we wait and watch rather than intervening immediately. "Let them complete the fence," he advised. "Once it's done and the utility company realizes their access has been compromised, Victoria will have created a problem for herself with her own community." I agreed to the strategy, though it was frustrating to watch the fence go up day by day, a 6-foot concrete barrier with metal reinforcement that looked more appropriate for a prison than a residential area. They left only a single access point where the road passed through, a heavy metal gate with an industrial-grade lock. By Friday, the fence was complete. The construction foreman sought me out, looking slightly embarrassed as he handed me a single key. "For the access gate," he explained, "HOA president said to give this to you as a courtesy." I examined the sturdy key and the even sturdier gate. Victoria had effectively acknowledged that the road was mine by giving me control of the access point, while simultaneously blocking my direct route to the main road. It was clever, but it had created an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. That evening, I replaced their lock with my own high-security model and installed additional cameras focused specifically on the gate area. I also placed a clearly visible sign, "Permitted road, access by permission only, contact property owner." For good measure, I created a simple website with an online form where authorized personnel could request gate access with 24 hours notice. The whole system was completely legal. Victoria had inadvertently strengthened my position by installing a gate on my private road and giving me the key. I now had indisputable control over access, with the obligation only to allow utility workers through for legitimate maintenance. I called Daniel to confirm my approach was legally sound. "It's perfect," he chuckled. "You've turned their strong-arm tactic into an advantage. Just make sure you're reasonable about providing access for the utility company, and you're on solid legal ground." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The fence might limit my direct access to the main road, but it had given me control over something much more valuable: access to Oakwood Estates' water supply infrastructure. The inevitable confrontation came early Monday morning. I was enjoying coffee on my trailer's small deck when a luxury SUV screeched to a halt outside my gate. Victoria emerged, face flushed with anger, with Robert trailing behind, looking distinctly uncomfortable. She pounded on the gate, rattling the chain and lock. "Reynolds, open this gate immediately!" I took my time walking over, coffee mug still in hand. "Good morning, Victoria. Robert, what can I do for you?" Victoria thrust her phone through the gate bars, showing a photo of my new sign. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot block access to a community road." I maintained a calm demeanor. "It's not a community road. It's a private road on my property with a limited easement for utility access only. Your own actions in building the fence and installing a gate have confirmed that fact." Victoria's perfectly manicured finger jabbed in my direction. "This is obstruction. The HOA will sue you for this." I smiled pleasantly. "You're welcome to try, but before you do, you might want to check with the water utility about their access requirements for the main pump station that serves your entire community. You know, the one you've just fenced off from the main road." For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria Harrington was speechless. The color drained from her face as the implications sank in. Robert looked from Victoria to me, slowly processing the situation. The pump station? He asked hesitantly. What does that have to do with... He stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned. The utility easement is for the pump station access? Victoria recovered quickly. This is blackmail, she hissed. You're holding an entire community's water supply hostage. I shook my head. Not at all. I'm simply exercising my property rights, the same rights you've been trying to violate since I moved in. Utility workers are welcome to access the pump station through my gate. They just need to request access through the proper channels, which I've set up specifically for their convenience. I handed both of them cards with the website address for access requests. 24 hours notice for routine maintenance, immediate access for emergencies, perfectly reasonable and legally sound. Just as our confrontation reached its peak, a white utility truck pulled up behind Victoria's SUV. A man in a water company uniform approached, looking confused at the scene. Morning, folks. I'm here for the quarterly maintenance check on Pump Station 47. Seems there's a new gate system? I turned to him with a friendly smile. That's right. The HOA recently installed this fence and gate, but don't worry. I've set up an access system. I handed him a card identical to the ones I'd given Victoria and Robert. Just register here for future visits. I'll let you through today, of course. As I unlocked my gate to allow the utility worker through, Victoria stormed off to her car, with Robert hurrying after her. The utility worker looked bewildered. Did I walk into something here? He asked. I just smiled. HOA politics, nothing to worry about. After letting him through, I returned to my morning coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and the sweet taste of tactical victory. Victoria had overplayed her hand, and now she was beginning to realize it. The battle was far from over, though. That afternoon, I received a call from Daniel. Victoria's trying a new angle, he warned. She's filing complaints with every regulatory agency she can think of: Building Code, Health Department, Agricultural Commission, Environmental Protection, claiming your operation is in violation of various ordinances. Sure enough, the very next day brought the first inspector, a county official checking for building code violations. I welcomed him cordially, showed him my permits and plans, and gave him a tour of the construction site where my house was taking shape. He found everything in order and left satisfied. The day after brought an environmental inspector concerned about agricultural runoff. I showed him my modest chicken coop with its 12 hens and my small vegetable garden, both well away from the creek and managed with organic methods. He actually laughed when he realized the scale of my operation versus the complaints that had been filed. Between you and me, he confided as he was leaving, we don't usually get called out for operations this small. Someone's really got it in for you. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 different inspectors visited my property, each responding to increasingly desperate complaints. None found any violations. I was meticulously careful to follow all regulations and maintain detailed records. Meanwhile, my camera system captured Victoria driving slowly past my property almost daily, clearly looking for anything she could report. I was prepared for these harassment tactics, thanks to Olivia's warning about the Ramirez family's experience. What I wasn't prepared for was the escalation in community tension. The water utility, frustrated by the new access restrictions to their pump station, sent out notices to all Oakwood Estates residents warning of potential service disruptions due to access issues with critical infrastructure. The notice didn't mention me specifically, but it didn't take long for residents to connect the dots between the new fence and the water access problem. My simple online request system wasn't actually causing any serious delays. I approved all legitimate utility requests promptly, but the water company was covering themselves with community-wide notifications. The first cracks in Victoria's authority appeared about 3 weeks after the fence went up. Robert showed up at my gate alone, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ethan, he began, uncharacteristically using my first name. The situation is getting out of hand. Residents are asking questions about these water notices, and some of them have figured out that our fence is part of the problem. I leaned against my gate, taking my time before responding. That's unfortunate. Has Victoria explained to them why she built a fence blocking direct access to their water supply? Robert shifted his weight from foot to foot. She's presented it differently, but some homeowners are concerned, especially after the water pressure dropped last weekend due to delayed maintenance. They're starting to wonder if this fence was a good idea. I saw an opportunity. I'll tell you what, Robert, I'm a reasonable guy. I have no interest in disrupting anyone's water service. If the HOA formally acknowledges in writing that this road is my private property and removes all claims to it, I'll set up automatic access for utility workers. No more service disruptions. Robert promised to bring my proposal to the HOA board, but I didn't expect much. Victoria had too much pride and too much financial interest to back down so easily. Meanwhile, my little ranch was taking shape beautifully. The house framing was complete, the roof was on, and interior work had begun. My chicken flock was thriving, providing more eggs than I could eat. The vegetable garden was producing abundantly, and I'd started selling surplus at a small farm stand by my gate on weekends. Ironically, some of my best customers were Oakwood Estates residents, who would drive the long way around to reach my property from the main road thanks to Victoria's fence. There was something deeply satisfying about that. Olivia and her children became regular visitors. Her 10-year-old son was fascinated by the construction, while her 8-year-old daughter had appointed herself chief chicken tender during their visits. Olivia was full of community news and insights, keeping me informed about the growing discontent within Oakwood Estates regarding both the fence and Victoria's leadership. The situation reached a critical point when a major leak was detected at the pump station, requiring immediate repair to prevent water outages throughout Oakwood Estates. The utility company called me directly, explaining the emergency and requesting immediate access. Of course, I granted it without hesitation. I had no interest in denying essential services, regardless of my issues with Victoria. But when the repair crew arrived half an hour later, they were accompanied by Victoria herself, who clearly thought this emergency would force my hand. "The utility company needs ongoing, unobstructed access," she announced triumphantly as soon as I opened the gate. "You'll have to remove your restrictions immediately." The head of the repair crew, a no-nonsense woman named Rita, stepped in. "Ma'am, we just need to fix the leak right now. Mr. Reynolds has been very cooperative. He approved our emergency request immediately." Victoria wasn't deterred. "This situation is untenable. Emergency services could be delayed. The HOA demands permanent open access." I maintained my composure. "The gate doesn't prevent access, it manages it. Emergency services can call me any time, as the utility company did today." I responded immediately. Rita nodded confirmation. "We called 20 minutes ago and he was waiting for us when we arrived." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "This is a public safety issue. We'll get a court order if necessary." I simply smiled. "You're welcome to try. But while you're at it, you might want to explain to the judge why you built a fence blocking the only direct access to your community's water supply in the first place." The utility crew proceeded with their repairs, while Victoria fumed helplessly. After they left, I reflected on how differently this confrontation had played out from our first meeting. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Victoria had intended to isolate and intimidate me with the fence, but instead she had given me control over something her entire community depended on. More importantly, her residents were starting to recognize her role in creating the problem. Later that day, I received a call from Olivia. "You've become the talk of Oakwood Estates," she said, laughing. "That water notice went to every home and people are asking questions. Victoria tried to blame the whole thing on you at the community center, but when someone asked why the HOA built a fence blocking access to our water supply, she couldn't give a straight answer. People aren't happy." The tide was beginning to turn. Victoria had overestimated her authority and underestimated both my resolve and the community's reaction when their basic services were threatened. "There's more," Olivia continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Howard Miller, he's a retired judge who lives on Maple Court, was asking about the legal basis for the fence at the last community meeting. Victoria tried to shut him down, but he kept pressing. Several other residents joined in, demanding to see the board minutes approving such a significant expenditure. Victoria claimed it was an emergency security measure that didn't require a full vote, but people aren't buying it. The next morning brought a surprise. A group of about 15 Oakwood Estates residents gathered outside my gate. For a moment I worried Victoria had rallied them against me, but as I approached I saw Olivia among them, waving me over. "Ethan," she called out, "these folks want to talk to you directly, without Victoria's interpretation." The group's unofficial spokesperson was Howard Miller, the retired judge Olivia had mentioned, a dignified man in his 70s with a full head of white hair and penetrating blue eyes that suggested he didn't miss much. "Mr. Reynolds," he began formally, "we've been hearing two very different stories about what's happening here. Victoria claims you're hostile to the community and blocking essential access, but the water company says you've been cooperative and reasonable. We thought we'd come straight to the source." I appreciated their approach. Instead of accepting Victoria's narrative, they were seeking the truth firsthand. I invited everyone onto my property, set up some folding chairs in the shade of a large oak tree, and explained the entire situation. From Victoria's initial attempt to claim jurisdiction over my land, to the fence that blocked my main access, to my simple request for formal acknowledgement of my property rights. I showed them my title documents, the recorded easement, and the online system I'd created for utility access. By the end of our impromptu meeting, the residents were seeing the situation in a very different light. "So let me get this straight," Howard said, summarizing for the group. "Victoria and the HOA built this fence without consulting the community? It blocks your main access to the road, and all you're asking for is written acknowledgement that the road on your property is indeed yours?" I nodded. "That's right, I've never denied access to the utility company. I just want my property rights respected." Patricia, a middle-aged woman who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I've lived in Oakwood for 10 years. Victoria has run the HOA like her personal fiefdom the entire time. This fence appeared without any community vote or discussion. Many of us didn't even know it was happening until it was built." Howard turned to the group. "I think it's time we called an emergency community meeting, without Victoria presiding." The meeting was scheduled for that evening at the community center. I wasn't invited, as a non-HOA member, but Olivia promised to keep me informed. That night, I found it hard to focus on anything as I waited for news from the meeting. Around 9 p.m., my phone finally rang. It was Olivia, sounding excited. "You missed quite a show," she exclaimed. "Howard presented everything we learned from you today." Then someone asked about property development plans around Oakwood. Victoria tried to change the subject, but people kept pressing. Finally, Jeff Winters, he was on the board last year before Victoria pushed him out, spoke up. He had copies of emails showing Victoria and her husband have been working with a development company called Barnes Group to buy up surrounding properties. The revelation apparently sent shockwaves through the community. According to Olivia, residents were outraged to learn HOA funds had been used to build the fence without proper disclosure of Victoria and her husband's financial interest in the surrounding properties. But the real bombshell came when Victoria, backed into a corner, blurted out something she clearly hadn't intended to share. "You don't understand," she reportedly shouted at the increasingly hostile crowd. "If we don't expand Oakwood Estates, our property values will drop by 30% when the Barnes Group project moves forward." The room had fallen silent. "What Barnes Group project?" Robert had asked, looking genuinely confused. It was the moment Victoria's house of cards began to collapse. The next morning, Daniel called with news. "I did some digging after Olivia told me about last night's meeting," he said. "Barnes Group is planning a massive mixed-use development right next to Oakwood Estates. Shopping centers, apartments, the works. They've already secured most of the land they need except for 2 parcels, yours and one other. Victoria and her husband have been working as silent partners, getting a finder's fee for every property they help Barnes acquire. They've been using the HOA as a tool to pressure holdout owners like you." Everything suddenly made perfect sense. The harassment, the fence, the desperate attempts to force me out. It wasn't just about HOA power or even expanding Oakwood Estates. It was about Victoria and her husband making a small fortune as middlemen in a major development deal. And now her own community knew it. The fallout was swift and decisive. An emergency vote removed Victoria from her position as HOA president, with Robert reluctantly stepping in as interim leader. A formal investigation was launched into the misuse of HOA funds for the fence construction, and most satisfyingly, Robert reached out to schedule a meeting with me and Daniel to discuss the gate access situation. The meeting was held at Daniel's office in Austin. Robert, looking tired and considerably humbler than when I'd first met him, came with Howard, the retired judge who was now heading the HOA's newly formed oversight committee. "Mr. Reynolds," Robert began, "on behalf of Oakwood Estates, I want to apologize for the way you've been treated. The fence was built without proper community approval and without consideration for your property rights or the practical implications for utility access," Howard added. "We've reviewed all the documentation. There's no question that the road on your property is indeed yours, with a limited easement for utility access to the pump station. The HOA had no right to claim otherwise." They presented a formal written acknowledgement of my property rights, signed by all current HOA board members, along with a proposal. The HOA would pay to remove the fence and restore my direct access to the main road. Or, if I preferred to keep the gate system in place, they would formally agree to my access management requirements and pay a reasonable monthly fee for the use of my private road for utility maintenance. I chose the second option. The gate provided security for my property, and frankly, I'd grown rather attached to the system I'd created. We drafted a formal agreement. The HOA acknowledged the road as my private property, agreed to my online scheduling system for non-emergency access, and would pay a modest monthly fee that would help cover my property taxes. In return, I guaranteed 24/7 access for genuine emergencies and agreed to maintain the road in good condition. Everyone left satisfied, except Victoria, of course. Things weren't over for her, though. The community's investigation uncovered even more than we initially suspected. Victoria and her husband had been manipulating property values and HOA policies for years to serve their real estate interests. They had used HOA funds to hire landscapers for properties they were selling, diverted community resources to enhance areas where they held investments, and even manipulated zoning committee votes through Robert's unwitting assistance. The scope of their self-dealing shocked even those who had long suspected Victoria of questionable ethics. The HOA legal team, under Howard's guidance, prepared a formal case against Victoria seeking restitution of misused funds and damages. Several homeowners also filed individual lawsuits for various grievances. Victoria and her husband tried to counterattack, threatening to sue the HOA board for defamation, but their position was untenable once the evidence was fully assembled. Meanwhile, Barnes Group found itself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. With Victoria's schemes exposed, they tried to distance themselves from the scandal, issuing a statement claiming they had been misled about certain aspects of the proposed development area. In reality, they had knowingly benefited from Victoria's insider position and manipulations. When local media picked up the story, HOA president's secret land grab scheme exposed. Barnes Group's corporate headquarters sent representatives to manage the PR crisis. Their development plans stalled without access to my property and the other holdout parcel, which turned out to belong to an elderly couple who had refused to sell despite years of pressure. With their original plan no longer viable and their reputation in the community tarnished, Barnes Group ultimately scaled back their development to a much smaller project that would be built entirely on land they had already acquired, without encroaching on either my property or the elderly couple's. Throughout all this drama, my ranch continued to flourish. My house was completed, a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom ranch home with wide porches and views of both sunrise and sunset. The chicken flock expanded to 30 birds of various heritage breeds. I added beehives near the wildflower meadow I'd planted specifically to support pollinators. My vegetable garden doubled in size, and I built a small greenhouse for year-round growing. What had started as a personal retreat was evolving into a small but productive agricultural operation. I began selling eggs, honey, and seasonal produce not just at my roadside stand but also at the local farmers market. I even started hosting educational tours for school groups, showing city kids where their food comes from. Olivia, who taught 4th grade at the local elementary school, brought her class for the first tour, which became a regular field trip for the school. Most satisfying of all was my new morning ritual. Each day at 7 a.m., an HOA maintenance worker would call to request gate access for the daily pump station check. Occasionally, when staffing was short, the call would come from more senior personnel. One morning, about 6 months after our legal agreement was signed, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered to find Victoria's husband on the line. His voice was tight with barely contained rage as he politely requested I open my gate for emergency pump maintenance. I could almost hear him gritting his teeth with each syllable. "Happy to help," I replied with deliberate cheerfulness. "I'll open it right away." As I electronically unlocked the gate from my phone, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. This was justice. Not in a dramatic courtroom showdown or through expensive legal wrangling, but in the small, daily reminder that attempting to bully and manipulate others sometimes results in having to humble yourself before the very person you tried to steamroll. Victoria and her husband eventually sold their Oakwood Estates home and moved away, unable to face their neighbors' contempt or the daily reminder of their failed scheme visible from their back windows. The last I heard, they'd relocated to Florida, where Victoria was trying to rebuild her real estate career under her maiden name. The new HOA leadership, with Howard as president and a completely restructured board, including Olivia as secretary, created a more democratic and transparent governance system. They even reached out to neighboring non-HOA property owners like myself to foster better community relations. The fence remained, but it evolved from a symbol of division to simply a practical boundary. The gate that had been installed to isolate me became a point of cooperation instead. As for me and Olivia, our friendship deepened over time. Her 2 children became regular visitors to the ranch, helping collect eggs and harvest vegetables on weekends. Her son showed a remarkable aptitude for construction and woodworking, helping me build additional chicken coops and rabbit hutches as my small farm expanded. Her daughter practically adopted the chickens as her own, naming each one and keeping meticulous records of egg production. Eventually, friendship blossomed into something more, and 2 years after the fence incident, Olivia and I were married in a simple ceremony on the property, with many Oakwood residents in attendance, including Howard and Robert, who had become unlikely friends through the whole ordeal. Robert had discovered a talent for community organization once freed from Victoria's domineering influence, and he now headed the community's emergency preparedness committee, working closely with local fire and police departments. Now, 5 years after I first moved onto this land, my life is richer than I ever imagined it could be. The ranch has expanded to include a small orchard, a herb garden that supplies several local restaurants, and education programs that bring in school groups, gardening clubs, and aspiring small-scale farmers. Olivia still teaches, but now splits her time between the classroom and our growing educational program. Her children, now my stepchildren, have embraced ranch life wholeheartedly. The fence and gate that caused so much conflict have become just another part of the landscape. Practical features rather than symbols of division. The legal agreement ensuring HOA access to the pump station has never needed revision. It works smoothly for everyone involved. Occasionally, new Oakwood residents ask about the gate's history, and the story has become something of a local legend, the farm that defeated the HOA queen. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or expensive lawyers, I think to myself each morning as I unlock the gate for the maintenance worker. It comes from standing your ground on your own land, literally. I didn't start this trouble, but I certainly finished it on my terms. And every time my phone rings at 7 a.m. with that access request from the HOA, I smile and remember. Never underestimate a man with land, a gate, and time on his hands. In the years since this all happened, I've met others facing similar battles with overreaching HOAs or neighborhood bullies. My advice is always the same. Know your rights, document everything, be reasonable but firm, and look for the leverage points that aren't immediately obvious. Sometimes, like in my case, the very thing someone uses to try to control you can become the key to regaining power in the situation. Life on the ranch continues to evolve and grow. We've added a small pond stocked with fish, expanded the beekeeping operation to 30 hives, and recently broke ground on a small commercial kitchen where we can process our honey, make preserves from our orchard fruit, and prepare value-added products that have become popular at farmers markets throughout the region. What began as my personal escape from city life has become a thriving family business and educational resource for the community. The irony isn't lost on me that Victoria's attempt to drive me away actually helped create something that has enhanced the area far more than another cookie-cutter housing development would have. Property values in Oakwood estates have increased steadily, partly due to the appeal of having a small, sustainable farm nearby with fresh produce and educational programs. The road that once divided us now connects us in ways I never expected. Each morning when I open the gate for the maintenance worker, I'm reminded that boundaries aren't always barriers. Sometimes they're just the places where we define our relationships with others, establishing not division but the terms of connection. Victoria never understood that. She saw boundaries as things to override or eliminate for her own benefit, not as the necessary definitions that allow for healthy interaction. In the end, her inability to respect others' boundaries cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her community standing, and her business opportunities. Meanwhile, my clear establishment and defense of reasonable boundaries created the foundation for a life more rewarding than I could have imagined when I first set foot on these 15 acres. So if you're facing your own Victoria Harrington, whether in the form of an HOA president, a boundary-pushing neighbor, or anyone else who refuses to respect your rights, remember my story. Stand firm, know the law, document everything, and look for the leverage points that might not be immediately obvious. Most importantly, remain reasonable and principled, even when others aren't. Justice sometimes arrives in unexpected forms, not as a dramatic courtroom victory, but as a small daily reminder that attempting to bully others can backfire in ways you never anticipated, like having to politely ask permission to enter a gate that exists only because of your own arrogance and overreach. That's a satisfaction no amount of money could buy, and I savor it with my morning coffee every single day.